and as I took a little note to her, this position that she is in now, and I don't even know the official title, we have it on the program, I think, but she's really, like, she has hit her stride. And really championing children, and it's so exciting to see, and so we're really glad to have you here as part of the conversation. And Rebecca Galen, who is a journalist who covers childcare issues for New America and other outlets. So I don't even remember how we got connected.
You were a source of mine for a story.
Yeah.
So the work Wonders was doing to help women in postpartum periods to identify that. Yeah, connected on that.
Yes, that's right. But like instantly, I was like, oh my gosh, Rebecca's amazing, and she is exactly the right person to be sharing these stories about our field, because we really do need to get these stories out. So we're so excited. She shared her questions ahead of time, and as John described them, they're hard hitting. So we're excited to have this conversation, and we have built in time because we want to have questions to just involve all of you in the conversation. So welcome, and thank you very much.
Actually, people want to maybe come a little further. There's a bunch of kids in the front row. We don't have microphones. Anybody in the back or the second row wants to fill up in the front, that would be awesome. Keep it a little bit more. Childcare went from being basically like an issue that was relegated to like the parenting section of newspapers and media outlets, they have it, to becoming really an economic one. And as we've seen the interest in childcare from media outlets really grow, we've had more to write about, and someone like me can really make this into a full-time reporting beat. And that is brand new. And in New America, we did an analysis. There are 500% more childcare mentions now in last past 2025 than there were pre-COVID in 2019 and early 2020. So we are seeing this issue explode onto people's consciousness, something that matters for communities, matters for economic development, matters for working, especially for working women. But you guys know this, because you've been doing this for so long. What I'm telling you isn't news. But what I want to talk about is what's really changed at Wonders in the 50 years that people have been here, including Joanne, who's been here for 37. This is sort of where expertise comes in, and what you see, what you change. But before we jump into this, I want to take a moment, take a beat, and acknowledge the moment that we are in. Childcare, which we've all understood here to be this vibrant undercurrent of our economy and society, has really become a front page issue in places like Minnesota, where it is a target. It is a target. Employees are reluctant to go to work. Parents are reluctant to go to children. We have federal agents coming in. Childcare spaces that aren't typically the sites of these sorts of interventions. We've seen a lot of trauma coming from these kids. So, leaving the politics aside for the moment, because that would be a very own longer conversation, I want to ask, either of you are surprised to see childcare being this pivotal spot as these issues come together in a federal level? You're seeing the city versus the state, and childcare is really becoming one of the major areas. What do you guys think?
So yeah, I'm not surprised. And I think, again, if you think about childcare and who is utilizing childcare, like these are families. And again, look at where the federal agents are targeted, right? They're very poignant parts of the city that we know there are high usage of minorities, high usage of women, right, who are leaving their children so they can go to work, who typically are Black and brown women. The workforce is typically Black and brown women. So I think it's a very specific target that they are looking at, right? So child care is one of those pieces that fits into that area. So I think that there's that. I also think that childcare in general, if you look at where we are situated, where the majority of programs are located, right? We are looking at certain vulnerable populations. While childcare is universal issue for all families, and you mentioned, we've known about the challenges for forever, right? I've been with the county 25 years, and prior to that, another 10 years having worked in childcare related to from babysitting into the childcare programs. And the dynamics have changed, utilizing it, but it's still the same in terms of who desperately needs that childcare is the vulnerable population. So again, I think it's just being reinforced, the population, the target, and where these messages are going.
We also when we talk about vulnerable population, we talk about people who are in the lowest income brackets, often have the option for low work, who have to really show up, who have a shift work, where they have 6 times to start, and they don't necessarily have the life transportation. So childcare does need to be a piece they can count on to really make it work and make money.
So when I thought about this, I was thinking about the initial story about all the fraud, and I thought it kind of it reminded me of like long ago when I first started. There were these sort of scare stories about childcare across the nation, and I thought it sort of is. It is not surprising in that I don't think as a society we have fully accepted the validity of childcare. That every family needs it to be who they are and who they want to be. And so it is, because we haven't fully embraced it, it's like it is just as valid as because back in the day I remember like there was a lot of guilt around like not being the nuclear family, and like that it was like, oh, it's too bad your child has to go to childcare. Like I would hear a lot of that, the guilt. And so I think some of it is because, in addition to all that Jen said, but we just haven't fully embraced it as being just like elementary school. Children need elementary school, children need childcare, and it's an okay thing. I think also it's just we have always been an under-resourced sector, and we're easily to target because of who works in the field and primarily the families who need it. Last week when we were closed, I met with all of our program directors and assistant directors. We had a Zoom call to talk about the increase in immigration enforcement, and because we have staff who've been impacted by it, they've had family members impacted, and I needed to make sure that our staff had a place, our program leaders had a place to talk about this, because they're carrying that weight too, and trying to lead their staff and to support their staff through this. And so it is all because the folks that go into this field are such nurturers and they really do care. It is really hard when you see your community impacted directly or indirectly, and you carry that as well as while you're doing all your other work.
When you talk about the validity of childcare, people don't always view the work here as being valid either on par with education or based on who does it, maybe they have more vulnerable populations that are still being served or are working here. How have you had to sell this to other people? Both families who come into your program, staff that want to work here, and people at the government level who may or may not want to support childcare in different ways.
So yeah, I think so. One is that understanding that early care and education really is part of that continuum of education, right? It is not a K-12 situation. Early childhood is not funded like the public school systems, right? And so there needs to be a political will and understanding about the public good of this field and this industry. The other piece also is that in order to prioritize it, it's really it's a mind shift, it's a value shift, right, of those initial years. And there's been data, and many of us have seen the return on investment for every dollar you put in the first 3 years, right? But politically, there needs to be a financial investment and a commitment to this space to really elevate it to where it is with the rest of the educational industry. So I think that there's the political will, there is the public good component of it, and then for families, families, I think they do value the first 5 years. To trust, I'm a mother of 2 children, to trust, someone to take care of my children while I'm at, somewhere else. I've been partying a lot, and a lot of trust has to go into that relationship. And so the value of high quality programming and programs that meet, Maryland excels, for example, the quality rating improvement system, who go above and beyond licensing, who obtain accreditation, whose teachers have credentials, whether that's a CDA, AA, or a degree. All those pieces, to me, speak of value. But we need to put the supports around that. And that's where I go back to, there's got to be that political will to invest and make those not just a budget line item, but really a commitment in financial dollars.
And I think in our early learning programs, I think sometimes the conversation can be around kindergarten readiness. This came up in a conversation just last week around, we describe what we do as children learning through play. And it was sort of, it came up in sort of, is that hefty enough, almost, to, in terms of selling what we do. And I think we've always said that, over 50 years, we've said children learn through play. And I still think that's really important because that is, how children learn. And we talk about that too, about our after-school programs and our before-school programs, because although parents feel you have to sell that less, because if parents need after-school care and it's in the school, they're not comparing, and they're not shopping around. But the way we talk about it is the social emotional learning that we teach in our after-school care, and the fact that it's almost like we had a director long ago who described after school as the new neighborhood. And it's really,
I love that term.
I know, he was a clever marketer. But it is true, because it is, kids are playing, and there's a balance between child-directed and teacher-directed play, which is really important for kids. And so giving them those safe spaces. So we do have to talk about what happens, but I think that we talk a lot about is our mission, and the fact that we incorporate anti-bias education and equity-focused teaching and learning. And when we survey our parents and we ask the reasons why, our mission is like the highest response, which is gratifying, and also like that resonates in a way, I think, for families, because they do want there to be some thought and intention around what happens.
So don't you think there was also a shift though, right? There was a shift where there was a period of time where there was such a focus on the academics.
Yes.
That conversation about, my catchphrase is that we prepare children for life and learning, right? Not just the learning. But there was that shift, right, around the 2000s of really trying to get the academic component. And programs were watering down kindergarten curriculums for preschool, right?
Yeah.
And preschool curriculums for 3-year-olds, and it just kept going back. Where, for many of us, the shock and horror, right, of seeing dittos in preschool, right?
Yeah.
Like, that was something we did not want. And it's so different for those who, if you think about where childcare really boomed in the 70s, right? And it was about really a response to women going back into work, right, to the workforce. And, it was a lot about play-based, and there was a really famous book, right, the things you learn in kindergarten, right, and, you don't learn, what you learn, how to stand in line, how to share, how to raise your hand, these are all life skills, right? And there was this shift that occurred, and I feel that now we're going back to the importance of the social emotional piece. But that really stems from the communication that we all are saying the same thing, that we're all sharing that same message. And I think there is some discrepancies within the industry, right? We're fortunate, I think, in Montgomery County, and Wonders is a really good example, right, of that balancing between the academics is very important, but so is the social emotional.
And I think it was around the race to the top, and, yeah, and so, in order to be valid, and we even have parents ask about, why don't we give kids homework? And we have to explain, why we don't, but that's what, because that's what parents at the time considered to be, an indicator of learning, because that's what they knew from their school, and so their school years, which were not really tough.
Also, that's when information's coming out that kids are not just lost, they can actually make a lot of learning, they can retain things, things that are teaching them at the young ages will stay with them. So you see parents that are trying to get a head start on reading, but what they really need is forming connections, trusting people, a lot of these social emotional skills, which I think are great to come back and to grow their consent. So Joanne, I want to ask you a bit about, in your 37 amazing years, which is a long time to any industry, especially in this town, people do jump around, some of the things you've changed. You gave me a few examples when we talked at the time, but I found these really fascinating. They reflect both some of the changing workplace demographics and some of what you talked about is guilt. I'm curious who you're seeing, what changes you're seeing, including the guilt piece, who does the drop off, what parents are saying, what your staff is expecting.
Yeah, so, there's been a lot of changes. I mentioned, I remember Working Mother magazine when I first started, and there was always a cover story about, it's okay to leave your child in childcare and go back to work, and I had studied women's studies in college, and so I felt really passionate about, that's what drew me to this field, was I went from women's reproductive rights to childcare, and it really is this, it's all about choice, and really, living the life you want to live, and so the guilt I see, it maybe comes out in, I think now it's more everybody needs to work in order to live, particularly in this area. It's really, the cost of living is so high. So there's less pressure around that, I think, in some ways, but there is, I've seen dads more involved more recently than back in the day, and I've been sort of thinking about why, and I realized because of many years I've been here, I remember when suddenly I realized, oh, now I'm older than the parents. And I think parents now, in the past few years, the dads were in childcare. And we've had, over all these years in early childhood, and certainly in before and after school programs, we've had men who work for us. And so I wonder if, dads now had men in their early lives who were, doing this work and were role models for them that, yes, men can be caregivers. And I think there's just a general greater awareness around work-life balance and roles in relationships and partnerships and things like that. So, but then we also used to have a requirement that parents had to volunteer a certain number of hours each year. Parents did all of our snack shopping. We would reimburse them, but they got a list on Friday and they brought bags. They would, and sometimes, but it was a lot of groceries coming in, and we realized at one point, this is not sustainable. Parents need childcare because they have to work. Why are we adding to the workload? And so we cut out the requirement because it just wasn't realistic anymore. And so I think we shifted in some ways of thinking, not that we didn't before, but I feel like there's been a growing awareness about what families need and what parents need to make it all work.
you have a half-day program before, so
We did.
So this half-day changed?
It's gone. Yeah, yeah. We had a half day. We worked together. Yeah, so, yeah, no more half day.
Okay, well, Jennifer, I want to ask you some more questions to you.
Sorry.
I want to ask a similar question to you too about things that you've seen change, or you've been in this field for a while. And I want to add that I get to, as part of my reporting, I get to go to different places in the country where doing this innovative childcare work. I live in Montgomery County, I live in this county, and everybody's so educated, everybody works, there's great childcare, and like, do you have any of these programs that provide free childcare? And I'm like, no, not yet. So how are we so forward thinking on the role of like women and people working, both parents working and having amazing schools and having all these other resources, but with childcare, we are still probably squarely with the rest of the country and not having it forward. Or maybe that's what you're telling me.
So, true, Montgomery County is very resource rich, right? However, so two things can be right. We are resource rich, however, childcare is not. You know, and again, it's the way that childcare is funded. It is really on the backs of parents and providers. That's where the burden lies. There isn't nationally, there's not a heavy financial influence in this field. I think we are fortunate in Montgomery County. 8 years ago when Mark Eldridge came into office, he stood on the platform of early care and education, and he committed to that, and he lifted up an initiative that came with dollars. So that right there was the political will and the investment, the financial investment, to be able to do something different. And, you know, I'm a big proponent to looking at the system itself and not looking at, you know, just adding a service, a program. We want to change the system holistically so that we can take that burden off of parents and of providers. So our initiative, for example, has about $15 million in it. It started with $10 million and it's increased over the years. During the pandemic, this initiative, which aimed to organize government, so it brings together the county government, it brings the public school, and the community college to help us work smarter. And it really is an effort to organize government and ensure that we are maximizing every resource and that we're not duplicative. So Montgomery County, what are some of the things that we've been really committed towards is that system. We are a county of 1.1 million residents, extremely diverse, right? We have, 40% of our population are English second language speakers. Myself, I'm a Latina, right? And so, you know, looking at the implications of what that means culturally, financially, the demographics, the dynamics in each community. And you had mentioned something earlier about really trying to serve what the family needs, and that's a real core component of early care and education is being able to respond to individual needs. I think childcare is not necessarily a cookie cutter approach, right? It really, every family dynamic is different. And you know, I've run nonprofits and I've run for-profit childcare programs. I've run a Head Start program. I've run small and large rate programs, and each one is very unique in how they respond to their community. So the investments that we put in needs to allow for some of that flexibility so that you can really respond. So going back to what is Montgomery County doing that's different, right? We have something called an EquiCare grant. An EquiCare grant is a response to the lack of infant and toddler child care that exists in Montgomery County. We currently only serve about 19% of the total number of babies in this county in child care. Think of how many moms want to go back and dads want to go back to work after a baby's born. They cannot find child care. And I'm sure for those who are parents or you know people who have been on wait lists 2 years, before they even know they're going to be pregnant, they put their name on a wait list, right? So that's true. That's accurate, right? So we lifted up EquiCare. We invested, we've done 2 years of about $4.2 million to be able to serve about 150 children. And now we want to scale up, right? And that's the other point, right? Is we worked out the bugs of things. We have a program that really looks at vulnerable populations who can't access any type of subsidy. We pay at cost of care, which is another important piece. Remember before I said that the burden of child care is on the parents and the providers. So it's the tuition and really the low wages that our workforce makes. That's how child care programs work. So we reimburse that cost of care. Parents pay around, I think the average is about $18,000 for infant care, while we are reimbursing around $25,000 per seat for infant care, right? So again, the idea is that we can provide that, that funding so that the programs can be operational. We also, I wanted to make it seamless and I wanted to make it burdenless. So we pay upfront, right? Because if you operate a business, you have to have the money in the bank before you even do anything. So we pay upfront so the providers can actually budget and operate successfully. So that's just one example, really trying to look at what the climate needs, what providers are asking for, how do we make a system that doesn't make you jump through 10,000 hoops and, most benefit programs ask for a lot of documentation and proof. They're basically begging for the benefit. We try to make that much easier and streamline that process.
That's great. I'm really glad to hear that. One thing that's come up several times in our conversation today has been COVID and what a real game changer was. I think it touched every industry, but childcare is one of the ones I think has seen significant changes. We hosted at New America a meeting for reporters who cover childcare, and a lot of them were like K-12 reporters who during COVID kept getting these assignments about what's going on here, and said, I'm going to learn a lot, and then they basically explained it to me as part of their beat, and it's easy to add on. Not many have standalone, and these people who have standalone beats in childcare, like my colleague Elliot Haskell, he's like, nobody was talking about this. Like when we were booking, it was like the only one out there, and now there are far more people, even though this has been going on for a long time, but it's really been these game changer for different. I'm curious for both of you, how has COVID shifted childcare? Anything from the staffing to hours to expectations, something else on this?
Yeah. So staffing took a big hit because a lot of people left the field, and I believe we're still seeing the effects of that because it's really hard to hire staff. There just aren't people going into the field, and so what that means is, and Wondrous has always had benefits and higher than the average compensation rate for our area, and that's been a commitment of the board over all these years. But even with that, and that makes us more attractive, but even with that, there just aren't people going into the field because people can't afford to go into the field. And then if they do, they are not as experienced or well prepared as we used to get. So we have had to do a lot of our own little, like grow your own, like we've always provided training, but we do training, we do mentoring, we do coaching. Like there is so much effort and energy that goes into getting the current workforce where we want them to be. And so when we interview now, it's like if we can find a philosophical match as a starting point, then that will help with all the other technical stuff. But I would say that was the first place. It took us a couple of years after the height of the pandemic to really get back to what it had been beforehand because of the work from home policies. And families they just weren't sending children to care, and particularly in after school care. And so it was challenging financially to manage the budget of the organization and just we trimmed things down to essentials almost in order to make it all work. But now, we've come out of that. During the height of the pandemic, the thing that was new was that it was easier to fundraise. People, because it was like a crisis, and we were fundraising. Essentially, we decided we wanted to put our energy and our funds into making sure our staff had healthcare, because we do offer healthcare, but it's a shared premium cost. And I was worried that because we had to shut everything down, that staff would roll off of their healthcare, because they couldn't afford their portion.
Yeah.
So during COVID, we shrunk our hours some, and it was really expensive because we maintained pods in our programs. So we had to have, like, we had a teaching team, and then we had a sub for that teaching team. And we couldn't use floating teachers anymore because of, like, all the health concern, because we were operating on, like, what the health guidance at the time. And so it was very, it was challenging. And we have a current board member who, tells the story that she had a baby, needed to go back to work. It was COVID, and she had a video tour of the program, and because parents were not allowed into the program then, and on her first day back to work, she came and just handed her baby to one of our staff members who, she had not met yet. And like that takes so much trust. And I mean when I heard that story, it's just like, God, like the things that, it was such an intense time. But it really does show that critical importance of that partnership and trust.
But then also it takes trust, yes, but also this is where your mission, years of being here, years of experience, she wasn't thinking the same out of that. She was going to a trusted provider, and that's a lot of the work that you and your team do, day in, day out. Even what you said, we're fundraising to keep your health insurance. You're a parent looking for a child care center, and you see that these people are giving their staff health insurance. You think they're staying around a little longer. It makes a lot of sense. You can't just go to Chipotle and sit in line with health insurance. So I do think, like, give yourself some credit that the mom felt comfortable enough handing over the baby in what was, such a crazy time. Do you want to add that to Jennifer?
Yeah, so, what's changed? So during the pandemic, all of a sudden childcare became very, very essential, right? Whoa, it's needed.
Optional before, right?
Yes, and it really, there was this thought that it was not a priority, and that just shined a light on the canyon of disaster that is childcare, right? Our structure is a mess, nationally, at the state and locally, right? It's messy. And I think, now that we're on the other side, some of that focus has decreased, right? Kind of people went back to their new normal, right? I think teleworking has had a huge implication in how business models are using to operate childcare programs. But I also think that there are some things that we need to continue to elevate, right? How essential we are. I think that the pandemic itself was an opportunity for us to reframe how we communicate the essence of what we do and why we are needed. So that, I think, was an opportunity that we should continue to elevate. Some of the things that have, I think, changed, and for good or for bad, right? I think people are trying to figure that piece out. The virtual components. It is easier to connect with families, right, through a teleconferencing type approach. But let's not forget that early care education is built on a human-centered approach. So that human connectivity is essential. That's like a core value. So the virtual components are great additional tools, but they should not be relied on for the sole means of communication.
And I have one more question before turning it to the audience for questions for you guys. And that is, I don't know if either of you thought you would be here at this deal, along with those kids, here we are in 2026. I'm glad both of you are. But let's leap forward another 2 decades. Say we are back, so everyone wonders 70th anniversary. Everyone here, it's not age. What in this future time period has changed about childcare and what has stayed the same? You guys have hinted at things like the guest, but I'm curious to hear from you as to what's different, what's still there.
So, what's changed? So in Dream World, what's changed is that we finally got it right, that there's been public investment to make universal child care, because it's just, that's what's missing. And that the conversation and the policy sort of shifts to understand a more holistic approach to this. And so that would be the thing I would hope would have changed. And the thing that has not changed is basically the essential ingredient And if we're still able to meet children where they are and connect with them and really support them and guide them in their learning and growth and development, then that will mean that we have done everything around the structure to really protect what is the essential ingredient.
So you got, the classroom will look the same, but the support outside the classroom looks different.
Yeah.
So from my lens, right, as looking at county government, just looking at the landscape, I think because we got the question ahead of time, we have similarities, right? And I'm just trying to, on the fly, trying to reframe it a little bit, right? But to me, there's three pieces to it that I see different, right? Is the universal recognition of the importance of early care education. The second piece is sustainable funding, right? We cannot move forward without that. There's got to be a huge investment. I'm excited to see our partners in the audience from the Children's Opportunity Alliance, right? Really trying to look at how do we leverage those dollars so that in 10 years, 20 years, right? We do have a sustainable funding stream that allows us to provide the best care and experience opportunities for young children. And then what's near and dear to my heart is equitable access. Equitable access regardless of your income, regardless of your circumstances, that parents have choice to where they want to go. And because they are in a zip code does not determine what choices they have. I really want to have an access for all of our families to opportunities that meet their needs.
In terms of staffing, see that change something that shifts?
Well, yeah, so the universal, you break that down, and that means that there's pay equity, and there is where I think we are is, there's a lot of talk about building a career ladder in the state, and the way I think about that is we really needed to recognize where we are right now in the current workforce and making sure that there are realistic alternative pathways for the current workforce. But this building towards a vision of like, what do we want the workforce? What does the workforce need to be? And so making sure that we are creating systems that support the folks that go into this field, and it's an attractive field to go into, and because the work is so important, and I really do believe that if we can get early care and education and child care right, that we can actually change the world. That is just like, it just feels like
We need that on a t-shirt.
Because it is so, it just touches so many things.
Yeah. There's a lot of smart people doing all the research, I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Ma'am, are there questions for people who want to ask these brilliant early childhood minds?
My name is LaDonda, and my question is, we haven't really talked about the climate we're in right now. And I'm also reflecting on COVID, right? You mentioned the importance, and we talked about narrative. So, given the climate that we're in right now, what are the stories and narratives we need to put out there? And what are the things we need to not say?
Well, I'm going to refer back to our workforce and compensation study. 19% of our workforce is living in poverty. 86% of our workforce. Montgomery County, we did a study in Montgomery County on our early care education workforce. So 86% are living below the self-sufficiency standard. That is unacceptable. That our workforce, those who are caring for our most vulnerable children, are also just as vulnerable. So that's a narrative that I want to push.
Workforce in child.
In child care, in early care education. A paraeducator in MCPS makes twice as much as our early childhood teachers in child care. There's a lot of work that's happening at the state, right? But again, you need that political will to get that financial dedicated stream. DC elevated, and Donna, I know from DC that you were part of that excellent work, right, to have pay equity funds to be able to support the workforce, right? And that is something to be considered, right? You have the workforce. I think the second narrative is that our community right now is very traumatized with what's happening at the national level. Many from my community recognize the privilege that I have being able to speak on this. Most cannot. And I think that we have to, I know I have an obligation to be able to lift that voice up. And I think that the reality of who our community is and who it's made up of, right? We are their voices because they do live in fear right now. So I want to make sure that I'm connected and I am listening at all times and being able to be that voice for them. But hearing their stories is ultimately important. I look to the Latino Child Care Association of Maryland, who has a large percentage of their membership here in Montgomery County. And very fortunate to have a very good working relationship, to hear the stories. But again, the realities of what is happening and the fear, because as you've heard me say, it's not a matter of if something's going to happen in Montgomery County, it's when. We know that the climate is changing quickly. And I do expect something to happen in Montgomery County soon. And so we need to be prepared and we need to make sure that our community knows their rights and how to stand up for themselves or to get those advocates to help and share that message.
Yeah, and I think, last year we had to create a safe space policy for our programs, just so our staff knew and our families knew that we had this in place. But I think that and that's one of these things where we are, in this work, you have to constantly be proactive, but also responsive, because, it's all about relationships and different, a lot of stuff is put on us. We don't get to self-direct so much. And so I think that the other stories need to come out, and I think, and I know, LaDon, you would have ideas around this, but like inviting parents and families to share their stories, because I think that's, there's not a natural way for that to happen so much. And so figuring out how to just hear from parents and like what their experience, so the baby at the door, like that's a really powerful story. And so how are we sharing like the lived experiences of the families who use childcare and what's important to them and why it works or why it doesn't work? Because I think the more we can hear from families, because it really shouldn't be based on an individual family's ability to afford something.
Yeah. For the quality care.
Yeah.
All kids should be getting.
Yeah.
Keep that information.
Yeah. I think Cameron had it.
My question was around, as you talk and listening to the changes that are happening and have happened since you got into this business. So talk a little bit about the regulatory environment and its impact on your business.
So long ago, we would have, staff meetings. Like staff meetings are really important in order to make it all work. And we would hold staff meetings, all staff together, and we would have parent volunteers come and sit in the classrooms during nap time. And that was a really easy way, and you could sort of count on having regular staff meetings. Well, you can no longer have a volunteer alone in the classroom with kids, even if they're napping. And so that means we have to hire extra teachers or bring in, floating teachers or bring in substitute teachers. And you can't, the entire teaching team cannot leave the classroom at the same time. So we now have to schedule 2 staff meetings because we have to do it in shifts. And it adds to the bottom line. And, staffing is our most expensive part of the budget. It's like 83% of our expenses. And it's just these incremental increases, because when you think of, extra staff a couple times a month just for that, and not to mention, other parent-teacher conferences and, all these other things that we do, it does have budget implications.
How does the how do you, or who helps, I guess, in terms of you mentioned the Hispanic Association of Child Care Providers, and I know there are others. How are they looking at those and presenting those to local and state folks as to why these rules exist and what benefit those rules have for the children?
So licensing is complicated, right? Because licensing is pushed down both from the federal level under the Child Care Development Block Grant as well as state. And licensing, as a reminder to everyone, licensing is your bare minimum, right? It's health and safety. That's really what it's targeted for. So, as federal government changes in administrations, new things are either pushed down or lifted out. The state, same thing. New administration, new items are lifted down or pulled out. What there is right now, I think, I first started in childcare here in Montgomery County. Most of my in-class was in DC. But I remember, Komar, it was like 20 pages.
What is it?
The regulations, right? The sort of state regulations, like 20 pages. That was it, right? And like 5 of them were like introduction and the closing, right? Definitions. Now it's a binder, right? And part of it is that there hasn't been a really good review to see, alignment. Most of the regulation changes in the past, I'd say 10, actually, I would say since Race to the Top, since 2000, so we're looking at 25 years, right? Are unfunded mandates. So those who are in childcare, you know about the number of training hours you have to take. To become a family childcare provider, there's somewhere around 50 hours of training that you have to complete. Center staff have, I think there's like 12 mandatory hours of training, right? They're not free, right? Who has to pay them? The applicant or the program, right? So again, it's these unfunded mandates. It's not a coordination of what is being required now to make sure the lines and it's not duplicative or an add-on, right? How do we streamline the regulations? So I think associations and advocates and stakeholders, their job is to constantly be pushing and asking. So there are a couple, we're in the midst of legislation season right now, right? And I've already reviewed 3 different legislations on child abuse background checks. 3 different ones. They're asking for basically a background check, right? And we want our children to be safe, correct? We want that. But why are they coming from 3 different, individuals and 3 different proposals, and they are slightly different, and one is, focusing on the who gets access, who should be fingerprinted, and the other one was more about the technology. Put it together and then replace what already exists, right? So those are the pieces that have to happen. There needs to be a thorough understanding of how these are being pushed down, how to advocate towards that and streamline those.
Yeah, and I think the folks who are doing the work in the field need to be incorporated in those early plans for developing regulatory changes.
I think I'm riled up in here.
In general, what happens early childhood providers not in the early childhood.
So I think there are conversations that are happening at the state, but they are siloed, right? There are senators and representatives who are putting forth, right, without having been connected. I think it depends who it is, right? But there's also items that come out, for example, social work, right? That they add in education without having connected with education. That's one of the ones that I reviewed, right? So there are pieces, there's just some disconnect. It's because government does work in silos. And so how do advocates put themselves out in those tentacles to be able to make sure that they're on top of everything that's happening?
You had a question?
Thank you.
We studied and looked at the cost of the investment childcare providers, organizations maintaining staff, and the turnover, and how long they actually get to keep the staff that they're investing in, those averages.
So we did, in our workforce compensation, we touched on turnover. Most educators are staying about 5 years in their job. And what we also know is that the reason why they are leaving is pay, compensation. So we do have some data to that. There's also the national data that's reviewed that, and NYC comes to mind for the work that they've done. I know that, I just mixed up Oregon and Washington. Because Oregon also has done a study on this, right, to see the reasons why, right? But typically the number one reason is compensation. And again, I just know from anecdotal observations, right, that directors have lost staff for literally 25 cents,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah, I mean, it is amazing, and, yeah, it's just, and I think, is it 43% of the childcare workforce in the state is on at least 3 public supports?
yes.
That's, so if you think about like,
We're just paying for it separately.
exactly.
Again, I think it's, when you look at Wonders and what they've been able to create with their fiscal planning to be able to support staff in terms of having, viable wages to live in this county is expensive. And to be able to provide, to many a luxury health insurance, right? Again, there's only a small percentage based on our study of our workforce that has insurance. And, if we also want to lift them out of poverty, you have to think beyond that, right? This is a population that is, they're vulnerable in the sense that it is a laborious job, right? You are exposed to germs every single minute, right? You're tired, right? And then the other piece is, your retirement savings, right? That is really, really rare to find in many of the programs. So if you want to build out of poverty, right, you have to build in those pieces as well.
It's also exhausting.
Yes.
It is like very different than
Emotionally,
our job.
physically,
Yeah.
So, sorry, do you have a question back there? Do you want?
No, I want to add something like Jennifer said. I am part of the Latino Childcare Association. I am the senior director. I'm working part-time with them. But at the same time, I am a family childcare educator here in Montgomery County. I had 21 years here. I remember Jennifer 21 years ago. It's not easy. Like Jennifer said, the comma now is a binder. It's not friendly. More when you speak another language, not English. I don't understand. I need to go to look at a lawyer to explain me what the regulations say. Like a family business, I always say I am a family business because I am one of the privileges. My family is working with me, but my budget is like Joanne said, my budget is 70% is going to payroll. The 85% is maintain my program because the working compensation, part of the payroll, the childcare insurance I need to pay is very high. Cleaning, the maintain is in my house, but I need to pay the depreciation of my house. It's not easy. Entonces, part of the Latino Childcare Association, or all the association, what we doing is talking in the level, in the county level and state level, because right now, for example, all you are here, they know the government here in Maryland, they don't put money for Maryland childcare credential. There are no money. Last year, they 24-25, they cancel because there are no money for Maryland childcare. What is the money for Maryland childcare? It was only $400 a year for help us to go to the conference for training. $400 is nothing when one of the conference, like for example, right now we are going to Ocean City for 4 days is $400 only for registration, because the education is not cheap. If you want quality, you need to pay. So we need to pay because the state they don't have the money for 2025, 2026. The state put money for Maryland childcare credential, but what happened? They are looking at vendor. They just spend like, 7 months looking for a vendor. If we don't have a vendor yet. To say, we had the money in July 2025, if the bonification is not coming yet, To say, we are talking different level. Next Monday we are going to, even in Annapolis, this is an opportunity to talk with the delegate. The other thing, this is more level state. For example, the scholarship program, they continue freezing. We don't know how long will be continue at the same time. I don't know exactly how many children are in waiting list right now. Probably, the last 5,000? 5,000, I listen. To say, we are talking, here in Montgomery County, we have the privilege we had a lot of support, but sometimes it's not enough. Like, Jennifer said before, I am in only Maryland. My zip code is 20832. Although they said, no, you don't need help because you are in one of the zip code, there are rich people. It's not true. That's not true. There are so many people, working parents, they are working very hard. They need to support. Even more, when I saw after the COVID, I never closed my program in COVID because my parents, they are essential workers. I was open. It was not easy because we try to help the family in different moments. I can see after COVID there are a lot of social, emotional, not only the children, it's with the parents, how you need to work with the parents, you know. It's a part of my job in my program with my family is working with the parents. Children is easy. No, you know, that's how we do the association here. Thank you.
Let me add something for clarity here too, you know, that, again, right now Monday is evening in Annapolis, right? It's an excellent opportunity to talk with your state legislators, right, about the challenges that we deal with in this industry. But we also need to think about how childcare is structured, right? The dollars do come from the federal government, right? And we've seen the dismantling and the destruction of the big ugly bill, right? Like what it's doing to our industry specific, right? Between HHS and Department of Ed. And those pushes coming down, right, really are harming many of the infrastructure pieces that we have at the state level. And then the state has to look, well, how are we going to react to this, right? And locally, I feel that in the past year, my modality is to react to what's being pushed out at the federal level. It's really hard to be intentional. And I think we were starting to get on a wave to be intentional in Maryland, but now we're on a wave of having to react to the chaos that's happening and how that impacts our program. You know, the CCDF rate is impacted. There was an increase in the recent budget that was signed on Monday or Tuesday, right, this week in Congress. And Head Start, right, has pieces that they put some money into it, but I mean, it's like a drop in the bucket, to be honest. But what you're not seeing, right, is the stuff that they're getting rid of. Like, think about DEI and immigration status and who we're serving. So if I cannot accept these children who do not have the right immigration status, where will they go? So that cost is going to come out somewhere else. So at the state level and local, we're entering some really big, hard decisions to make on how to manage these dollars. But again, how do we prioritize so we don't go back on all the good work that we started, right, and that we have? And how do we not go back to cause harm? I think that sort of aligns with what you were saying, right? That right now legislation, like all these bills are coming out, but where's the money behind it?
We'll take one more question, and then I know we've got a little bit long. Is there a question for Fred?
Yeah, so I wanted to circle back. You had mentioned the DC Pay Equity Fund. Obviously, we're like a mile, whatever, from the DC border here, so that obviously has a big impact. And I wonder, like, what are some of the lessons learned in terms of if Montgomery County wanted to model that, you know, what would it cost? How could it be implemented? Because we've seen, you know, the workers in DC having to really fight to maintain that, and so that it's not a good long-term strategy if you can't assure the continuity of, you know, healthcare and pay that will keep people in the field. So, I'm interested in what are some of the thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think the first thing is to retain Livio Dale, who was part of that the think tank behind that, right? But jokingly aside, I think that one of the biggest lessons learned when they moved from the individual doling out of bonuses for compensation to the teachers and actually giving it to the programs as part of their operational expenses, that to me is a more systemic approach versus doling out one by one, right? Is putting it into the infrastructure of those programs. So as they operationalize their budgets, you know, how is that factoring in? And I think that you create more equity within those programs, right? So that's one piece. I think that the way that, in terms of how they actually leverage that up, right, it is through taxes, right? And so taxing the rich. That's gonna be a hard sale here in Montgomery County, and I question, is that a Montgomery County work or is that a state work, right? Montgomery County doing an increase in tax, I can't speak to that, if I read the TVs, I don't think so, right? At the state level, how can they leverage that? And that's the question. And then third, I think in terms of the rallying that they did, it was very intentional. We have wonderful LaDon here in the audience, right? The way that they went about collecting the voices of the workforce and the families, and then the legislators, and really the education that happens. I'm always thrilled when I hear politicians talk beyond sound bites, and that's what I heard in DC, beyond sound bites, right? You had some key council members there who really understood the business side, the economic imperative, as well as the human component of it. So those are the three things for me.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, because DC is well known as Montgomery County has been one of the highest tuition rates for early education in the country. And there's such a disconnect for people to understand that if I'm paying this much, what do you mean that staff are not getting paid enough? And so really breaking that down so people understand the true cost of care, and that, it's the workforce that subsidizes the whole thing. And the other thing that DC did is they have healthcare for childcare. We have programs in DC that are before and after school programs, so they're not part of the pay equity fund because it's for early childhood only, but they are eligible for this healthcare for childcare. So we have staff who don't go through our regular healthcare because they can access, and they don't have to live in DC, just work in DC. And they do not pay, because we do have this shared copay structure. They don't pay any premiums, and Wonders pays the whole portion of the premium, and it is less than what we pay of our tiered rate in Montgomery County, and they get to choose from these various plans, and so it is thinking, really holistically, and the other thing is I remember years ago with having dinner with Elizabeth Kukinski, who was in charge of early childhood OSSI in DC, and it was at the time she was being sued by some libertarian group in Virginia because they were changing the part of the pay equity plan was to increase requirements for the workforce. And there was a lot of, the workforce really rallied and said, you're going to be forcing many people out of the field, and that's not what we want. And so they took a step back and redesigned it to recognize where the workforce actually was, and scaled it, plans to scale it out. And so I think, did I have that story right? Kim actually.
Can I add quickly something on the pay equity fund? So the pay equity fund passed as a part of the law in 2018. In 2020, we began doing education around taxes. And by 2021, we were able to change the tax law that raised $175 million, $100 million went to housing, $75 million went to the pay equity fund. What happened was the mayor began to siphon off stuff. And then that's where the force of the community, the parents, the educators, and others put pressure. We did a lot of different tactics. We can talk about that separately. But the mayor this year, she wanted to pull the money. There was so much pushback that they got put back in, and the council found it. But in this next budget season, which has already started, she's saying she's also not running for re-election. But she says she's not going to fund the pay equity fund. Although these dollars were raised because people paid more in taxes.
Right.
But I also want to say we should not shy away from saying tax rich.
Yeah. I know we're running out of time, but Kim, she was the DC director after being a wondrous director.
Right over there. I was just gonna say that through my experience through the years, the one big takeaway that I have seen is that there has not been as much investment or education about the need for teachers for 0 to 3.
Yeah.
We get a lot of people going into education and thinking, they're coming out with an early childhood degree, and they're going to pre-K, or they're going to a public school that pays higher for that degree. And I found it very difficult finding staff to work with the infants and toddlers at the level that we could pay, at the extra physical demand for them. And I think that's something that we really need to focus on is how are we going to get more people working with infants and toddlers.
You know what? Everyone forgets the babies. That's my question.
They don't know the magic of the baby.
The most dollars are invested into the preschool. Again, looking at our supply and demand study from Montgomery County, we know that 84% of the preschool-age children are being served, but 19% of our babies. Because it is the most expensive. It's hard to find staff, right? If you find them, they're expensive. Your ratios are 3 to 1 in Maryland. It's untenable. So really the focus is on how to prioritize them and redirect your funds, which I'll just put a plug in again. That is why the equity grant is to be able to serve that specific population at cost of care.
Thank you guys so much.